Today we are going to look at the criteria of making a 3rd edition Necron list to use in 9th edition 2023, and it's coming right up.
Necrons!
Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. Right, it is time finally to make a 3rd edition Necron list to use in 9th edition. I am looking forward to this. Today we're going to talk about the criteria of making the list, and then I'm going to post another video all about the list that I'm going to make. I've had quite a good experience of updating some old armies to new rules, mainly because of my Space Wolves, because my Space Wolves were from the Eye of Terror Codex, the 13th company. They had their own set rules in that Codex supplement. However, when Games Workshop released a new Space Wolves Codex, they made those rules defunct, and I had to adapt my 13th company to a new Codex. And I'm going to use that experience to help me adapt the 3rd edition Codex into the 9th edition one. This is the Codex that got me into the hobby. This picture right here on the front of the Codex, I saw it and thought I have to play Necrons, and that was over 20 years ago, and I'm still playing them. I love this Codex. It has a special place in my heart, and I was actually playing this Codex for 10 years. It took 10 years for it to be updated towards the end of 5th edition. The update brought a lot of new miniatures and brand new fluff. Basically, they got rid of all the fluff, the history, the story of the Necrons from this Codex, and they made some new fluff. And along with it, some new rules, things like dynasties. I mean, this doesn't have different dynasties in it. It has different paint schemes, but not actually different dynasties. This is just one dynasty, the Necrons, and that's how my army is. So it's going to be interesting trying to adapt this into, well, this Codex now, which has a lot more flavour, a lot more units, and what, a lot more rules, including those dynasty traits and relics and warlord traits, all the stuff that we never had in this Codex. So let's have a look at how we're going to adapt. Now, if you're planning on doing something similar, not necessarily with this scenario, but any scenario within Warhammer, there are a couple of things to consider, because you could be adapting a list using the actual old rules. You could be using the old edition rules. You might be playing, for example, say 4th edition rules and 4th edition missions, or, as in my case, we could be adapting an old book into the current rule set. So you have to approach things slightly differently depending on what you are doing. Now, the first thing that I think I need to decide is, well, about the dynasty. What dynasty does this old book match into the most? Now, looking at this 3rd edition Codex and remembering how we used to play, it was very different to how we play now. We only had Gauss weapons in the army for guns, and those weapons were all able to hurt vehicles. We were a pretty shooty army. Apart from a couple of assault units, we were all about shooting. We weren't that great in close combat. We had terrible morale. We were initiative 2, so we were slow to hit, and when we failed our leadership tests, we died very quickly. However, apart from that, we were actually very survivable. The RP was really good. There were some special rules you had to keep up with to maintain your RP. You had to have a resurrection orb within 6 inches and another unit of the same type on the table. You even had a rule where if you died, you could drag your dead along with you, or even when that unit was killed outright, the dead warriors used to be able to go and join another unit right across the table. We had some funky rules, the monolith teleporting units through the door where you could then re-roll your RP. It was fun times. However, trying to determine what the army was all about, I would say basically they were a shooting army and a survivable army. Now the dynasties which sort of matched that, the ones which popped up in my head first, were Mefrit, Sautek and potentially Zerrikan. I did look at the custom dynasties as well, but I felt none of those really matched this codex that well. So Sautek are all about Gauss weapons, matches this codex pretty well. Mefrit are all about shooting, and they have some good AP and the stratagem, which is really good. And of course Zerrikan, who have a great extra sort of save and survivability. So you've got your mortal wound save and then your re-roll of RP. So I thought those three matched the best out of the dynasties that we have in this book, and I had to select one of them. Now I seriously considered all of the options for this dynasty, but my initial thought was Sautek, and in the end that's the actual one that I thought suited it the best. And I was quite pleased when I posted a poll on my community tab asking you guys which dynasty you thought suited it the best, because the majority of you thought Sautek as well. Now looking at the rules of the Sautek dynasty, we've got the ability to re-roll morale, which I think will be very useful, just helping us to survive, because of course I'm going to be playing lots of warriors, because warriors were the staple of this codex, so that's useful. Also, my warriors won't be able to take the Gauss Reapers. It's going to be Flayers only, because that's the only option that was in this codex. So their other ability of a rapid fire at 18 inches is going to match this army very well. The dynasty code is Conquering Tyrant, and again I think that's going to be useful for this army. An extended aura on my HQ units, which we'll talk more about in a minute. And then the other one is to fall back and shoot, and I'm going to be quite a shooty army, so again this is going to be very useful. I'm not too impressed with the Sautek stratagem, to be honest, because it's quite points heavy, 2 CPs, and it gives you +1 to hit. Effectively, it's like having a My Will Be Done. Now, I won't necessarily have My Will Be Done on the table. Again, more on that in a minute when we look at the actual units that I take. So it could be useful, but it is CP heavy. The Sautek Warlord trait is Fights First, which whilst it wouldn't necessarily match this codex because we were very slow in close combat, the initiative was 4 back in these days as opposed to 2, let's say, on the warriors. So you had a chance of striking first. So I am going to use that relic because I think it could be quite useful. I'm also liking the Sautek Warlord trait, which I've used many times in the past when I played Sautek in 7th/8th edition, and that's the refund of a CP on a 5+ each time you use it. I'd have to double check. I'm assuming the rules are the same. You can only refund 1 CP each turn. I'd have to double check that, but that's probably right still. It's been a long time since I played the Sautek Dynasty because I've been playing more competitively up against Richard and his competitive orcs. So this is going to be a fresh of breath air as well, because I'm going to be able to play a Dynasty I don't normally play, restriction of units, so that I've forced myself to take different lists. We don't want to have to play Nyalic and the Silent King all the time. So yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun. Right, now I want to go through the codex and look at the units and have a chat about how we're going to use them, adapt them for 9th edition. I'm going to fully use 9th edition rules for the units, but I want to make them as accurate and fluffy as I can. So first it's the HQ, and we have just one HQ choice, the Necron Lord. Now, the Necron Lord could have some war gear to give him a destroyer body, so effectively we had 2 HQs, now known as the Locust Lord and the Lord. There is a Necron Lord in the new codex. However, when I look at this model, he was our only character, and he was basically like the best character that we had because it was only one. But the point I'm making is effectively he could be an overlord. I mean, in the modern age, I think he would be an overlord. The question is, what do I do when I'm building this 3rd edition list? And this depends on how strict you want to be, because I want to be quite strict of really duplicating that old list. If I wanted to be the most competitive that I can with this adaptation, then I probably would go Overlord. I mean, the Overlord is like the new version of how good a Lord used to be in the old book. However, I think I'm going to really restrict myself and say Necron Lords and Locust Lords only. But I'd like to know, if you were doing this, would you just do that, or would you say that I can use an Overlord for this army? So yeah, let me know in the comments box below. Now next up we've got the Elites, and we've got the Necron Pariah, the only Necron unit which of course has been discontinued. I do have the Pariah models. Now it's fair to say, back in the day, I never really played Pariah that much. They occasionally came out. They were quite expensive, 36 points a miniature. However, what I'm thinking is, because I have those old miniatures, and when I play this army on the table, it's really going to represent a 3rd edition army using those old miniatures. And whilst they aren't in the new codex, we do have Lich Guard, which are very similar effectively to the Pariah, especially the ones with the war sign. Now, the Pariah did have a war sign with a gun in, which Lich Guard of course don't have. But I'm thinking I want to use some Lich Guard with war sign in my army and use my Pariah miniatures, and then basically have those in my new 3rd edition list. What do you think? Do you think that's a good idea? Or would you just drop the Pariah miniatures and not use Lich Guard as them to keep it really like in tone with the codex? Again, let me know, because I'm very interested to hear what you think, what you would do. Now, next in the Elites is the Immortals, because they weren't troops, of course, and they have just Gauss weapons, so no Tesla weapons. Again, in the Elite slot, we've got Flayed Ones. Now, Flayed Ones did have some extra sort of war gear. They also could infiltrate, which of course they can't do now, but we can deep strike. So I suppose arguably that's similar. But obviously Flayed Ones are there in the Elite slot, and there's no real change there. Just if I want to use Flayed Ones, then I can. Troops, of course, the Warriors, and that was the only choice, and there was no choice of guns. The only choice you could have disruption fields, if I can say it. Disruption fields for 2 points, which basically allowed them to hurt vehicles in close combat. But you very rarely took those because they were 18 points each as it was back then. And of course you had to have at least 2 units of these and 1 HQ, because that was the detachment back then, the force organisation chart as they called it. So anyway, Warriors with Gauss Flayers only, that's all I'm going to choose. Fast attack, we've got Wraiths. Now Wraiths never had any guns back in those days, so it was literally just the claws, so just 1 war gear option. And yeah, Wraiths are in there. Of course they had a 3+ invulnerable save back then. That was so nice. And then we have Destroyers in the fast attack choice. Of course now Locust Destroyers, just with the Gauss cannon, standard really, and Scarab Swarms, which again could take this disruption field for 4 points on Scarabs, which was quite a lot, but very useful. So yeah, Scarabs, obviously I can take those. Heavy support, so we had Tomb Spiders in heavy support at the time, so I can take Tomb Spiders. However, they I don't think they had, did they have gun options? I cannot remember. 1 core, yes they did, yeah that's right. 1 core claw can be replaced with a particle projector equivalent to a staff of light. That's why the old models, some of them have one gun, none of them have two. So it was just one gun, Staff of Light profile. Interesting. And then we have, of course, the heavy destroyers, the Locust heavy destroyers. Again, no gun options. There was just the heavy Gauss cannon, which effectively is the Gauss destructor now. So that was your heavy support, along with, of course, the classic, the most classic, the unit which I just have to have in this army, the monolith. Again, there was no sort of weapon options. It was literally just the Gauss flux arcs on the side of the monolith, and I'll be playing the monolith, and every unit that I play in this I will use my old school miniatures just to make it look as classic as I can. Now there is one additional unit, and it's not a Lord of War, because they never had Lords of War then. It was just classed as a special character, and we only had two special characters. We had the Nightbringer and we had the Deceiver. So it would be very nice to get one of these in the army. In these days you had to have your opponent's permission to play a Catan, and the Nightbringer was, I think, 360 points. 360 points, I am correct. And considering most of your games back then were around 1500 points, that was like the max. He took up a lot of your points. However, I think I'm probably going to play the Nightbringer in my list. Now my next video is going to be all about the list. Now if that list video is out already, I'll link it up for you just there. In the meantime, here is a playlist featuring some other Necron list building videos I think you might enjoy.